Hello everyone, welcome to Mr. Noctory. Today, we're arriving in prehistoric times. Before Egypt, before writing, before bread, before the words "I'm fine" ever existed. We were once small, naked, shivering creatures in the cold forest, only knowing how to run, not how to start fires, not how to speak. Our first post-hunt meal, raw meat, torn by hand, blood smeared on our chin, tree roots, insects, dried larvae, considered premium snacks when nothing else was left. Before we begin, if you genuinely find this a cozy place to hide at night, feel free to like and subscribe, but only if you truly want to. No pressure. Like the old tavern rule, you stay only if you need a quiet seat. And you know what I love most? Reading the comments, seeing where you're from, and what time it is. Whether it's New York or Norway, 1 in the morning or 5 in the morning, you're still here, and I see you. Now, dim the lights. Turn on a small fan if you have one, not because it's hot, but for that soft humming sound. You open your eyes, no clock, no calendar, no good morning texts, only sunlight, faint and dusty, filtering through red mist. Everything is silent, so quiet you can hear sand brushing your skin. This is East Africa, about 3 million years ago. Dry wind, dusty air, cracked earth like a forgotten loaf of bread in the desert. No lush forest cover, just sparse grasslands and thorny bushes shivering like they're hungry too. It's no longer a tropical paradise, just a neutral, grey, uncaring place that doesn't mind whether you live or die. You, in this world, are not at the top of the food chain. You're somewhere between a rabbit and a vulture. You've just woken up, on dry dirt, next to a crooked tree that seems unsure about standing. On one side, a deep hole. On the other, predator tracks. And you are still crawling. Short limbs, long arms, an oddly oversized head. Your pelvis turns sideways, as if your body hasn't decided whether to walk on 2 legs or 4. Your spine curves like someone with chronic back pain. Your head hangs off your neck like a coconut awkwardly perched. You don't have real heels, just thick bone lumps formed after hundreds of thousands of stumbles. You look like someone trying to cosplay as a human, but not quite pulling it off. You don't know your name, because actually, you don't even have a concept of name. You just know something inside you is pushing you to stand up. Your oldest ancestor, maybe a dude named Australopithecus afarensis, just decided to try the craziest thing anyone's done on Earth, stand on 2 feet. And no, it wasn't some grand reason like history books say. Not to conquer the world, not the will to evolve. It's just, there were no more fruits in the trees. You couldn't climb as well as monkeys, couldn't run as fast as cheetahs, couldn't dig like wild boars, and you certainly didn't have a tail like bonobos to balance when you slipped. Compared to your primate cousins, you were slow, weak, clumsy. Like evolution was playing a game of mix and match with the wrong parts. But because of that, you began doing what none of your cousins ever did. Ask questions. Monkeys could climb trees, but they couldn't see the lion stalking in the valley. You, because you stood up, you saw the rustling bush and guessed what was coming. Your stomach, flat and angry, growled like a soft thunder from within. So, you stood, legs trembling like a lizard in snow, back curved like a bow unsure how to shoot, head tilted upward, seeing the sky for the first time in a way that felt deeply human. And you discovered something. Standing up means you see further. Not just farther in distance, but farther from fear. You are no longer pressed to the dirt like other hiding creatures. You began observing. You became curious. You were no longer something. You were becoming someone. But just as quickly, fear pounced. Standing meant exposure. No more hiding behind rocks. No more crawling under grass. You were taller, meaning easier to spot. And in a world where every eye is hungry, that's a steep price to pay. You feel your heart thudding like a drum in your chest, though you don't yet know it's called a heart, but you stay standing. And that is the strangest thing a creature can do, to be afraid, but not crawl back into the cave. Wait, your back hurts now. Your legs feel like snapping. You fall, face down into dirt, sand in your nose. Your neck goes crack like a broken windshield wiper. Welcome to the cost of being human. Standing back pain. Walking bleeding toes. Surviving no more dreams. But you try again, a second time, a third time, until that upright stance becomes normal. No one stood up to become Homo erectus the Great. They did it because they had to survive. That moment, you stood up in the grasslands, morning light catching your tangled hair like a bird's nest. No one clapped. There was no epic soundtrack, only flies and wind, and a loneliness so sharp you had to lift your chin higher to keep from crying. But because of that, your ancestors didn't die. They stood, walked, migrated, sparked fire, crafted tools, and fell in love. Until you lay here now, under a blanket, playing a podcast about someone who stood up. And so an era began. Not with writing, not with cities, not with manifestos, but with a fragile body, standing, in wind, in grass, in the wild, and refusing to give up. From here, we move forward, walk onward, slip and fall, but not stay down, collapse, but still crawl forward searching for fire. Because if they hadn't stood up that day, you wouldn't have legs now to kick those deadlines. You're curled up inside a small rock crevice. It's raining, or at least something cold and clingy like rain. Your hand grips a sharp stone, dull at the tip, covered in scratches from striking nearly everything. Bones, trees, rocks, even your own forehead. You don't know what you're doing, but something keeps pushing from inside. An idea not yet formed, a vague instinct, as if you're holding the power of thunder in your hand, but you're still a monkey. You don't have language, no plan, no whiteboard sketching the path of evolution, just a hungry belly, wet fur, and a massive thigh bone from an animal that died yesterday. And then it happens. No one knows why. It was around 2 million years ago, in a place like the Rift Valley of East Africa, full of volcanic rock, red dust, and white bones scattered like trails of an endless hunger. You may be a Homo habilis, holding a basalt stone picked up from the riverbank, heavy and smooth. You don't yet know that archaeologists in the future will call it an Alderman tool. You only know it makes a clack when it hits bone, and a zing when it strikes quartz. You don't know you're creating technology. You're just surviving. Maybe you struck 2 stones together out of anger. Maybe a failed throw hit a chunk of quartz. Or maybe you just wanted to make noise because thunder in the sky looked cool. But what happened doesn't matter as much as what came next. The first spark appeared. It jumped, small as a glowing mosquito, shimmering like a teardrop on a god's brow. You flinched like you saw a ghost. Your world had only 2 colors, dirt and blood. Now there was orange. You stared at the point where the rocks collided, touched it. The fire disappeared. You struck again. Nothing. Struck again. Still nothing. until you almost gave up. Puff! Another spark flew out. It touched a dry leaf. It touched a patch of rotten moss. And then, smoke. For the first time, humans saw smoke from their own hands. Not from a volcano, not from a wildfire, but from an intentional act, even if that intent was just hit stuff for fun. You howled, not to call anyone, but because you couldn't contain the greatness of the moment. That howl would later be called language, but right now, it was just too much feeling bursting from your throat. Fire wasn't just light, it was power. You weren't scared of the dark the same way. You could roast meat, chase off predators, warm the friend shaking beside you. You, once a fearful tiny creature, could now sit in the middle of the forest, make camp, and not get eaten. But power always brings anxiety. One night, a sudden rain doused the coals. Smoke vanished, light disappeared, and the first thing that returned was the growl. You panicked, reaching for your stone, striking again and again. Your hands shook, your heart pounded, but the fire didn't come. In that moment, you realized knowing how to make fire is one thing. Knowing how to keep it is survival. You didn't know what homeland meant. You didn't know you were creating culture. But strangely, the fire didn't just keep you warm. It kept people close. One person added wood. One person blew on the smoke. One mumbled something that sounded like a lullaby. You didn't say anything, but your eyes met theirs, and you knew you weren't alone anymore. And when you sat around that first fire with a few hairy friends, sharing roasted marrow, listening to the crackling wood, you understood what community meant. No words needed, just sitting near each other, inside that glowing red circle, was enough. And from that moment, the world changed color, as if you had trapped a storm in the palm of your hand. Fire, once a tool of the gods for punishment, now sat between muddy creatures who smelled like meat. You didn't call it magic, but you knew it was no longer a disaster. It was a tool. From the color of mud to the color of warmth, from the sound of howling wind to the sound of the first voice, you no longer had to sleep with one eye open, no longer had to eat raw, parasite-filled meat. You began to touch the future, a concept you didn't yet have a word for. Your ancestors didn't know what they invented. They only knew the fire stayed and the beast left, and from then on, they were no longer at the bottom of the food chain. Fire didn't teach you how to love, didn't teach you to dream, but it taught you one thing. You could change everything. No claws needed, no speed required, just the knowledge to make fire and sit together. And so, the first night with light made by humans was also the first night you told stories. With your hands, with your eyes, with smoke and the smell of charred meat. You wake up in the middle of grassland so hot, even the sound of your own breathing feels like fire hissing. This is the dry savanna of East Africa, where dry winds sweep over cracked earth, and the trees only reach your knees. The grass stretches all the way to the horizon. No shade, no nearby water, only dust, heat and flies buzzing like the soundtrack of hunger. No guns, no bows, not even a pair of pants to stuff rocks in for a heavier punch. You're hungry, not I skipped breakfast hungry, but the kind where your guts stick together like two sun-dried skins. In front of you is a herd of antelope. Far away, their shapes blur in the heat haze. They're fast, they have horns, they have everything you don't. So what do? You run. Run without breathing, without resting, without thinking. You chase one, not the slowest, but the one that loses patience first. This isn't a solo act. Sometimes you lead, sometimes someone else is close behind. One carries a spear, though it can't go far. One loops around, one follows the tracks. You don't talk, but a glance exchanged through dust is enough to understand. We hunt together, because you know it will stop before you do. It will tire before you do, because you, not the fastest creature, are the most enduring one. This technique researchers call persistence hunting. Hunting by exhaustion. No traps, no ambush, just stubbornness. You chase the prey for hours under the sun. Your feet bleed. Your face is red like baked brick. Your mouth hangs open like a fish on dry land. But you don't stop, because you know, if you fall before it does, you won't just lose dinner, you'll become someone else's. A lion, a hyena, or worse. The night cold, killing you because you don't have enough energy to shiver. You don't hunt to prove anything. You hunt so you don't get eaten. That antelope, though fast, still has to breathe. It breathes through its mouth. And when it breathes too long with its mouth, it overheats. And when it overheats, it collapses. You don't win with strength. You win with smell. No joke. That's a biological fact. You have millions of sweat glands. You don't have thick fur that blocks heat loss. You are one of the rare creatures on Earth that can run under 104 degrees Fahrenheit sun without dying from heat stroke in 30 minutes. Meanwhile, the antelope, though it runs like the wind, has to pant to cool down, meaning you don't need to be faster, you just need patience, and to sweat better. The smell of determination, the smell of sweat, the smell of not giving up. That was the first time in history a creature killed its prey without needing to bite. You kneel by its body, trembling, not from emotion, but because you're about to faint from dehydration. But in your hand is raw meat. You've won, not with muscle, but with the stupid belief that if you just keep running, you'll get there. Your ancestors didn't have fangs, thick shells or fins, but they had guts, literally and figuratively. They didn't hunt with violence. They hunted with hunger, thirst, hunger, will to live. And so, that first hunt was also the first time you learned something deeply human. Patience is a weapon, not flashy, not loud, just keep going. Even if you sweat, even if your legs scrape, even if no one claps. You weren't faster, weren't stronger, but you didn't stop. And that was how you reached your first dinner. Not with claws, but with willpower. And thanks to those raw meat meals, your brain began to grow. Protein, fat, and energy from meat nourished your neurons. Every time you chewed, you were paying for the most luxurious part of your body, thinking. No meat, no big brain, no big brain, no imagination, no storytelling, no. You, remembering this past right now. You've just killed an antelope, not with a trap, not with a spear, but with sheer stubbornness and leech-like persistence. And now, you have a new problem. How to eat something 3 times your size without having it stolen. You drag the carcass back to the stone shelter like someone who's just won an Oscar, but knows for sure no one's building them a statue. The first to arrive isn't your friends, it's the flies. Next come the eyes, peeking through the bushes, human eyes, wolf eyes, and maybe someone hungrier than you. You know, you can't eat alone, and you're not the first to think that. At ancient sites like Olduvai Gorge or Gona, people have found bone fragments shattered, not by animals, but by stone striking stone. Bones cracked open for marrow, rough cuts like the ones your own hands would make, and marrow not meat, was the first priority. It was liquid gold in a world where every calorie was a biological revolution. No need to chew much, no need to cook, just smash, suck, swallow. One spoonful of bone marrow was enough to run another 5 kilometers, or escape a leopard hungrier than you. Sometimes even human bite marks show up, as if, back then, everyone was too hungry to care about table manners. And so, the feast begins. No tablecloth, no wine, no one wearing plastic gloves, but everyone, from old to young, from the failed hunter to the almost caught runner, gathered around that piece of meat as if it were the center of the universe. You might not know the word thank you, but you tear the meat into 3 parts. One for the elders, one for the girl who broke her leg last month, and one for yourself. That's the first morality, and also the first survival insurance. If you're injured next week, the person you fed today might be the one to drag you out of a lion's mouth. Sharing isn't just kindness, it's a survival strategy. No doctors, no nurses, no government, just you. And whoever remembers getting a share of meat, not written in books, carved in bone, and the size of those who've been hungry. You eat with your hands, you eat with blunt teeth, you chew while squinting, because fat drips into your eyes, stinging like your own tears. Roast meat, keep dreaming. You eat it raw, tearing sinew with your front teeth, forcing down the liver that everyone offers but no one likes. And the strange thing is, you think it tastes good, because taste isn't about the tongue. Taste is being alive to chew. It's that you made it through hunger, not with weapons, but with unity, willpower, and a few dusty drops of drool. Once your stomach is full, your brain starts working. You begin to retell, not some thrilling adventure tale, but through your hands, your limping walk, your gestures mimicking the antelope's zigzag dash. Others laugh, others nod, the elders pat your back. The first story is born, around a pile of bones, and strangely, that meal becomes a ritual. Tomorrow, you'll be hungry again. Tomorrow, you'll have to run again. But tonight, with grease on your lips and the wind howling in the distance, you feel something very strange. You're not alone. That night, you sat alone. The fire had gone out. Your belly was still warm after the antelope meat, but inside your head, something burned even more than hunger. It wasn't fear, it wasn't cold, it was memory. You remembered the brother who didn't return after last month's hunt. The old man who used to tell stories, now just bones beside a bush, and the girl with the broken leg, who once ate the portion you gave, now no longer opens her eyes. You didn't know what sad was. You just knew. You wanted to keep them somehow. So you picked up a rock, not to throw, not to bash in an antelope's head, but to draw. You dipped it into ash, into dried blood, into red earth, and began scratching on the cave wall. 1 line, 2 lines, a head, an animal, a hand. You weren't trying to make art. You just didn't want to forget. No one told you what to do. No one hung a sign saying no graffiti. But your hand, blackened, trembling, still left the first mark of shaped memory. Not to admire, but to remind. We were here. We lived. We hungered. We shared marrow. The next day, the kids ran into the cave. They saw the drawing. They laughed. They teased you. Why is the antelope's head as round as Mom's belly? But then, a younger one quietly touched the drawing of the beast. They asked, did it run that fast? You nodded. They asked again, was it afraid of fire? You nodded again. Then you drew a spark behind it. The kids gathered. They began to ask. They began to learn. Not through letters, not through lectures, but through the images of survival. You didn't know you were teaching. But from that moment, the drawing wasn't just remembrance. It was the first lesson on how to live in a world without textbooks. You blushed, but you didn't erase it, because this wasn't meant to be beautiful. This was a survival manifesto. And so, from wall to wall, human memory no longer stayed inside the mind. It spread to stone. It hardened like bone. It began to tell stories for the ones who were gone. And more than that, it became something that couldn't be stolen. Meat could be taken. Fire could be seized. People could be killed. But the charcoal mark on the rock still stayed there. For the first time, you created something that would last longer than yourself. Not to live forever, but to say, we once existed. You didn't draw because you were an artist. You drew because you knew. One day, you too would disappear. And the only thing that might remain, not meat, not sound, but that black line on cold stone. You didn't keep a diary, but you just carved into rock a memory, a presence, and the beginning of collective memory. And you weren't alone. Tens of thousands of years later, in places like Chauvet Cave in France, Altamira in Spain, or Lascaux, people would find the same signs: bullheads, galloping horses, handprints on stone, as if someone once tried to scream, "I was here, and I lived." No lion ever etched its kin into stone. No elephant ever painted its grief. Only humans, though hungry, though trembling, though unable to write, still tried to preserve memory. You didn't draw for fun. You drew because you couldn't bear the thought of everything vanishing. And that is what separates us from every other species. Memory, retold. You thought you'd sleep well after a day of running your legs off chasing deer. But no, you lie beside the small fire, head on a rock, and still don't dare close your eyes. Not because you fear the dark. You've lived with it your whole life. Not because of the cold. You've learned to curl into animal skins, stuff moss between your toes. But because of the wind, that strange sound, softly howling, then falling silent. You open your eyes. Nothing. Just a few messy heads snoring nearby. But in your mind, the wind still echoes, like someone calling your name without knowing what it is. Sleep, for prehistoric humans, was a gamble. You closed your eyes and hoped the leopard would choose someone else. You drifted into dreams and prayed the fire wouldn't die halfway through. Sleep was surrendering your body to the darkness with no password, no fence. And deep in your heart, there's always a part that doesn't want to give it up. You turn over, hear the wind teasing through the cracks in the rock, the children dreaming, breathing like little piglets, the elders quiet, breaths as fragile as dry moss strands, a mother holding her child, as if letting go would make the baby vanish into the night. You've seen it happen. A rainy night, the cave nest on the other side, 3 people. None woke up the next morning. No roar, no scratch marks, no blood, just gone. As if the wind had chosen them. No one dared say anything in the morning. One shivering child stepped up, placed a stone on the chest of the one who didn't wake. No one told them to do that. It was just a way to hold that person there. Since that day, whenever someone passed, someone would leave a stone, a dry twig, or an animal tooth, not to mark, but to remember. Sleep and death began to blur, and we, those who didn't know how to name things, started inventing rituals. So from that day, We began guarding each other's sleep. One sleeps, another tends the fire, and not just the fire. We began sleeping in shifts. Some nap, some stay awake, then switch. No alarms, only agreement through glances. The elders often took short naps, as if ready to wake the moment a child cried out. The young slept more, but always in the center. The mother sleeps with her baby in the middle of the fire circle, back resting against the elders. The children pile into the center, not because they're afraid, but because the adults arrange the sleeping spots like a living fortress. The man with a spear sleeps near the cave mouth, like the final door. The disabled sleep closest to the fire, a way to give them the last warmth they deserve. We didn't call it strategy, but if anything helped humans survive, it was the way we shared both dreams and vigilance. One strange noise, the whole nest awakens. You have no clock, but you have tension in your chest, measuring time through each heartbeat, and from there, strange things began appearing in dreams. A burning arm, an animal speaking human words, a name you've never heard but feels familiar. You don't know what it's called, but when you wake, you tell it, and everyone goes quiet, because we've all heard the strange wind. And so, before religion, before language, we already had the fear of sleep. A fear strong enough to make you place a hand on the person next to you just to make sure they're still breathing. A fear strong enough to teach your children. Sleep close to the fire. Don't turn your back to the cave. And if someone calls your name in a dream, don't answer. You have no letters, but you have a rule book passed down through every night. Sleep close, sleep warm, sleep, but still listen. Because you are descended from those who never dared to truly sleep. Because when you close your eyes, two things are always there: wind and fire. Wind comes from where you can't see, slipping in like whispers from Mother Earth, from the dark, from what we haven't yet named. Fire burns right beside you, shivering, glowing red, like an exposed heart, straining to stay alive. And you lie between the two. Sleep is the border between trembling life and whispering death. Maybe that's why you started to dream, because where fire and wind meet, there, the other world might crack open. You don't clearly remember who the first person to die was. Maybe it was an old person who couldn't hunt anymore. Maybe it was a child, bitten by a wild animal, losing a leg. Maybe it was someone you loved, though at that time, you didn't have words for love. Before that, the dead just lay there. Where they fell, there they stayed. Wild beasts came, rain came, wind came, and memory was erased as fast as footprints in the mud. But this time, someone didn't let that happen. Maybe it was the child who threw stones at the beast. Maybe it was the woman who came back and dug the earth with bare hands. Maybe it was you, standing still watching, then picking up a bone and digging along. That was the first hole. Not deep, not beautiful, but it was the first period humanity put down on the earth to say, we do not forget. You have no voice, but you fold branches to lay on the chest of the deceased. Then you place an old stone axe beside them. No one told you to do this, but something inside said, if they go anywhere, they will need it. After that, others did the same. An animal tooth, a polished stone, an old shell from a distant river. No one knew where that place was, but everyone acted as if there was somewhere to go next. You have no flowers, but you place an animal tooth as a promise. We will continue on with a part of those who remain. You didn't think about spirituality, only thought, if you don't bury them, beasts will come. But somehow, your hand trembled more as you covered your loved one's face with earth. You saw their eyes, still open, as if they hadn't had time to leave, and you couldn't bear it. So you picked up 2 stones and placed them on their eyelids. For the first time in history, someone's eyes were closed by another. For the first time, departure was certified by the act of affection. From then on, we began to bury, and then a place of earth began to be left forever empty. No one walked there. No one pitched tents nearby. No one lit fires there again, because the feeling there was something remaining. Not a smell, not bones, but a sign of the sacred. You didn't call it a grave. There was no word for soul. But somehow, you knew that place was not for the living. Not just for safety, not just for cleanliness, but because we feared losing them a second time. In memory, you began to remember them with earth, with dry branches, with a back no longer seen in the sleeping nest, with an empty space near the fire that no one dared sit in. Then gradually, you spoke of them, not with words, but with hands. You painted handprints on walls. You traced animal blood over the eyebrows you remembered. You drew 2 red streaks where a loved one once sat, and thus, memory had form. The first person buried was not a ritual. Then came the time when you buried many at once, not because they died together, but because you could not bear to see each forgotten alone. One big hole, a group of people, the last embrace with earth. And you realized grief was no longer private. It was shared, a burden on collective shoulders. That was when memory was no longer personal longing, but collective memory. It was pain, dug by hand, loss, held by earth, memory, protected from the wind. From that day on, you didn't just hunt to live, you lived to remember. Memory was no longer only a private matter inside the head, but an act, a stone, an empty spot, a mark on cave walls. And when the child asked, "Who lies down there?" you pointed, then cupped your hands into a curve, and you told with gestures, with your walk, with the howl that person once used to call the birds. You told as if that person was still there. Every time you told, they lived a little longer, and from then on, death was no longer the full stop, but a hook for memory to catch onto, holding a part of the person in the flow of time. Not a cemetery, not a name, just someone who lived and still lives if we remember. You don't know her name. No one gave her one. No one to call except the moans of the woman about to give birth and the wind blowing through the straw tent. That woman is not your mother, nor your sister. She doesn't hunt, doesn't carry firewood, doesn't carve stones on the cave walls. But every child born passes through her hands, wrinkled hands, scarred hands, hands that don't hold spears, don't tear animal skins, don't draw images on the rock walls, but are the center of everything that keeps a community alive. While men are carved on walls with spear tips and wild animals, she exists only in the wide open eyes of a newborn child. She is the cornerstone. No one notices. But if she's missing, the whole roof collapses. Hands that know when to push, when to hold, and when to say, "Be quiet, it's not time yet." No one taught her that. She just watches, tries, fails, and doesn't run away when blood flows like a small stream between the legs of a crying girl. The first to call her midwife perhaps was the first look of the newborn child. No words of thanks, only breathing, a shiver, and the wet, tiny, trembling embrace that she receives. Sometimes she fails. Sometimes the blood is more than the cries. Some nights, 2 lives enter the cave, and only one walks out, and she sits alone, by the mossy ground, on the mountain slope. No one asks, no one comforts. She just crushes a leaf and places it in her empty palm. She is the first to know. Life is not only strength, but fragility. Not everyone is born, and not everyone born gets to stay. So she stays, not for money, not for fame, just because she cannot look away from life while it still trembles. She sits beside, silently, while the mother screams as if giving birth to the soul itself. She uses her hands, demanding nothing more than a breath out and the presence of the tiny one. Once, she soaked her whole arm in cold mud to save a twisted baby. Once, she bit the umbilical cord with her own teeth, then kissed the wound like a vow. No one saw. No one carved that story on stone. But in some caves in Europe and Africa, archaeologists have found women's remains lying beside infant bones, as if they died together. In some places, a necklace made of animal teeth or shells was placed on the woman's belly, as a charm for luck. No one knows for sure if she was the midwife, but that presence between life and death speaks something greater. Someone once dared to sit still, even knowing no one might rise again. And perhaps she was the first to invent medicine, not on paper, but by feeling. She tested leaves by chewing them, rubbing on her skin before giving to the sick. She applied clay on hot bellies, placed hands on the mother's chest, listened. By the rhythm of her own heartbeat. It wasn't healing, it was survival instinct. But if you're alive today, maybe it's because of someone like her. And then she was gone. No one knew where she went. Maybe the wind took her away. Maybe she fell and no one remembered. But generations after, there were still people sitting beside trembling mothers. Still someone catching babies with steady hands. Still whispers, breathe deep, it's coming. And so, the memory of the midwife lives on. Not by name, but by action. You don't know her name, but you know, life does not come into the world alone. You are not standing alone, even if you think you are. Even if you're holding a spear, facing a beast twice your size, with fangs as long as dry cactus branches, and your legs are shaking as if ready to run backwards. No, you are not alone. Because the person behind you was the one who tied your leather helmet this morning, the one who handed you a sharpened stone that had been heated all night, the one who gently pushed your shoulder and said, "Go, I'll save the rib for you tonight." Because life in prehistoric times had no superheroes, only people who didn't leave each other behind. You know this when you sprain your ankle and have to lie still for nearly 3 days. Someone passing by leaves a half-chewed rabbit leg without saying a word. The next morning, someone puts a stone in your hand, roughly carved with a crossed-out bear. It's encouragement, rough, but warm. You also know this when you yourself have to help carry someone near death, across streams, through brush, through a windy night, just because they once carried you through the forest without asking why. Back then, there were no contracts, no agreements, only memory and looks. And then, those people built communities, not with swords or conquest, but with bandages for the unrelated, with hunted food, not eaten first, and carrying those who couldn't walk, just because they once did the same for someone else. Archaeological evidence shows some paralyzed people lived for many years after. Their bones healed crooked with old breaks, but not alone. That means someone fed them, covered them with animal furs, and carried them away from danger, not because of obligation, but because we are human, and humans don't let each other die alone, not by law, not by government, but by shared will. The cave watcher, the firekeeper, the root finder. No one plays hero. They do their part and let others live. No glory needed, no name recorded, because they understand saving the life beside you is saving your own. No one survives alone in the wild. And life does not lie in claws or fangs, but in sharing the last root when nothing else is caught. Humans evolved not by winning, but by enduring together. Even those who couldn't travel far, like children or the elderly, had their place. A small child who listens closely to the stirring wind can warn of prowling beasts. An old woman with no teeth still remembers exactly where roots grow that soothe wounds. Some don't know how to hunt, but know how to tell stories. They tell of surviving the lean season, of the bear that didn't bite because they stood still. They don't write, but they pass it on. And thanks to them, memory is preserved, even when the strongest don't return, and even when some are weaker, limping, unable to throw a straight stone, they still get a share, because one day they may be the ones holding someone's hand in the dark. No heroes, only each other. You live today, not because of one great person, but because of a whole bunch of kind people whose names no one remembers. You don't remember exactly when, but there was a morning. The wind was gentle, the dew was thick, and your stomach could no longer bear walking 10 kilometers just to find 4 wild fruits and a lost snail. And then someone decided to stay. Just a flat, damp, muddy land where every step made a satisfying squelch. But it held a miracle. Tall grass and a kind of seed, small, sharp, pale gold, that when roasted smelled like memory. Wild grain, at first just a snack. Then someone buried it in wet soil, waited, and saw it grow back. Did you know? That was the beginning of every great tragedy in human history. And also, what made you full for the first time? No more wandering. You planted. But the interesting thing is, grain didn't grow in just one place. At the same time, in places far apart that had never met, people were also experimenting with tiny seeds. In Mesopotamia, they had emmer wheat and barley. In China, they played with rice and millet. In the Andes, potatoes and quinoa shone bright. In Central America, someone looked at a little grass and said, if this corn got bigger, it'd be great roasted. No one planned it together, but from China to Mexico, from the Nile to the Indus Valley, everyone quietly decided, let food grow near where we sleep. Do you see? History is sometimes great organized laziness. This event is called the Agricultural Revolution, about 10,000 years ago. But did you know? It wasn't a revolution right away. It began with a group of lazy hunters, maybe chased by wild animals, with sore feet, looking at the plains and thinking, what if I make food grow right here for me? They began to stay in one place. They planted something, and for the first time, a village appeared. Though at first, a village meant 3 crooked huts, 1 grain store bitten through by rats, and 1 wall made of positive thinking that the bear won't attack tonight. The price of not wandering. But when you no longer wander, everything changes. When hunting and gathering, everyone did everything. Finding food, making fire, helping births, making weapons. But when settled, a person plants, a person builds, a person guards, a person points fingers. And so, division of labor appears. Who works less? Who decides more? Who gets more grain? Inequality begins to sprout, right beside the first rice field. You think you choose the seeds, but sometimes the seeds choose who will stand on the podium to speak and who will stoop to harvest. And do you know what changes next? Ownership. When something can be stored, like grain, suddenly there's talk. This is mine. Not trees in the forest, not beasts on the mountain, but seeds, grain, storehouses, with doors, locks, and keys. And so there are thieves, and so there are guards, and from one seed grows a whole system of control, laws, and lawmakers. But don't forget this, the first person to sow seed, most likely, was a woman. In many archaeological hypotheses, women, primarily gatherers, were the first to notice. Seeds fall to the ground, then grow again. They didn't hunt. They observed the earth, observed cycles, and perhaps they were the ones who had the idea. What if I sow, then come back here? Agriculture, the start of villages, cities, empires, began with the focused eyes of someone holding a child and watching the soil. But there is one thing few talk about. Staying in one place was also when humans invented time. When you plant a seed, you have to wait. And to wait, you have to remember, calculate, keep a calendar. And so, the concept of future was born. No longer living only for today like wandering ancestors, now you begin to count how long the rain has fallen, when the sun returns, how many days the seed takes to sprout. The price of sowing seed is learning to live with time. And time, always demands payment in anxiety. But in return, you get a home. Something you can't have if you keep wandering is memory. Because only when you return to the same place, the tree becomes the old tree. The stone becomes where Grandpa used to sit. The hearth becomes where Mom used to tell old stories. A village births memory. Memory births history. And history might be a child with a stomachache from eating too much young grain, who then grows up to tell you, our ancestors planted the first seed here. And so, humans begin to belong to the land, no longer just passing through the world. Humans drive stakes, erect huts, and later build houses. Though the price is plague from rats, wars over land, and each failed harvest means famine, they still choose to stay, because they know between wandering hunger and hunger with neighbors, the latter can hurt less. And so, the first grain grows, not just from the earth, but from unconscious wandering habits. You don't appear in history books. No one carved your name in stone. No statues, no poems, no storytellers. But without you, there would be no one left to tell the story. You were the first to set up the tent, the one who lit the fire in the howling night, the one who knew to place a hand on the chest of the dying and whisper something no one understood, but everyone needed. And then you disappeared like all the first ones. No trace, no grand funeral, just a shallow grave, a branch laid on top, a stone to block the wind. You didn't need writing, because memory doesn't always need language. An ancient human skeleton with a broken leg. Broken so badly they couldn't walk on their own. But the break had healed. What does that mean? Someone cared for them, fed them, drove away wild beasts, sat by them at night, brought water, changed leaves, covered them with animal skin, not because of a vow, but because they couldn't abandon them. You once fed someone who couldn't walk, because their leg was broken. No nurse, only a quiet hand and a hungry belly still sharing food. That's how humans became human. Not because of big skulls, but because of unconditional compassion. But before healed bones, there are wounds. And some wounds don't come from accidents. They come from other people. Some ancient skeletons from Jebel Sahaba show marks of broken arrows, skull fractures, not from wild beasts, but from human fighting. But amid the violence are hands gently stroking dried blood, one injured, another caring. You were once stoned by someone, and then someone else gave you food because you couldn't stand up. Alongside primal violence was primal compassion. Archaeologists call this the first evidence of medicine. Not drugs, not surgery, just patience. Someone took your place, bound your leg with leather strips, kept you still, soothed you when you wanted to scream from pain. No morphine, no antibiotics, only endurance and time. What can you say to someone for weeks, for months, when they can't move? No movies to watch, no songs to play, only stories. And maybe, right then, the first stories were born, not to kill time, but to keep someone alive, wanting to live. In some places, people buried not one person, but 2, 3, even groups. At Sungir, a prehistoric burial site in Russia, archaeologists found 2 children buried side by side, wearing ivory ornamented clothes, bracelets made of animal teeth, laid tilted as if sleeping in a stone fairy tale. In ancient Egypt, at Jebel Sahaba, there were collective graves where many bodies lay side by side, bearing signs of wounds and mourning. Not warriors, just people who lived together, died together, and were buried together. You once lay beside someone for the last time, not because they were a hero, but because they were family. Fingers touching, a small stone placed under the head, a clay bird laid beside the chest. No one taught you funeral rites. You just did it because you couldn't do nothing. You are buried, not for convenience, but because someone believed you deserved a place to be remembered, a stone to sit beside, a corner to be silent. Tens of thousands of years ago, the first graves had no writing, only red ochre earth, a few stones arranged in a circle, a dry flower branch, a small shell. That was not a funeral. That was the last whisper of memory. You once lived, and I will not forget. Because humans, very early on, knew that death is not just the end, but a new chapter of longing. Your name is not in the books, but you once lived, and your life is the reason we are still here, the reason someone, tonight, is still lighting fires and telling this story. You don't just come from them, you are them. There is no clear boundary between prehistoric humans and you now. Only a long chain of folded memories, linking the hand of a mammoth hunter to the keyboard you're typing on. You've looked at someone sleeping and thought, I must watch over them till morning. You've saved the last piece of bread for someone with no teeth left. You've touched an old scar and felt your heart tighten, even if it's not your scar. So how are you different from them? You too, like them, had a first day afraid of the dark. You've heard the wind howl and thought something was lurking outside, stalking you. You've wanted to build a shelter, even if just with a thin blanket and the promise, I'm fine. You've lost someone and didn't know what else to do but hold tight to what they left behind, just like someone once buried a stone beside a loved one. You've loved, not for any reasonable reason, just because your heart told you so. Your body carries the whole history inside it. You close your eyes, you hear the first fire, you're hungry, You act like your ancestors did. You smell someone's hair. You remember something unnamed. You laugh, just like they laughed. You cry, and your tears aren't any more modern. Not all your ancestors were brilliant, great, or noble. Most of them just tried to survive one more day, keep the fire burning, cook something edible, not let anyone freeze to death. But from millions of ordinary days comes the day you were born, and you, though small, are continuing what they started. Not with stone or charcoal, but with the way you look at someone when they are weakest, with the way you stay when others want to leave. You keep memory by how you live. You are them, and they are why you know how to love, to care, to tell this story. On a sleepless night, they never left. They still live in your hands, in the small fire inside your chest that never goes out, in the trembling you endure, because you once heard the strange wind. You live, and you remember. That is how humanity has never disappeared. Saber-toothed. Theatre, arts and comedy. You are sitting amid dust and sand, and the gods are watching you from the mountain range. Athens, a March morning. No cushioned seats, no roof overhead, just 12,000 stone seats arranged in a giant semicircle, facing a bare stage. You arrive early. The sun hasn't yet risen above the Parthenon's peak, but the crowd already fills every step of stone. They shout, laugh, eat dried figs, and throw bits of bread into each other's hair. The scent of sweat, wine, dust, and laurel flowers blend like a strange incense. A chaotic prayer sent up to Dionysus. No one calls this place a theatre the way you understand it. This is ritual. This is where souls are stripped bare behind a mask. You don't just come to watch a play. You come to cleanse your emotions, to feel alive, or at least to remember that your heart still beats. Among that crowd, there are potters, mercenaries, people who just lost wives to plague. All of them, from commoners to nobles, come here to look straight into pain and laugh in its face. In 5th century BC Athens, going to the theatre was not a luxury for the idle class. It was a duty, part of democratic life. Those too poor to afford time off to attend had their tickets paid by the state. This was called theorica, a public fund ensuring every citizen had the chance to be educated emotionally, morally, and politically through the stage. When you sit in the theatre, you are not just an audience member. You are part of the collective emotional democratization process. You are taught how to be outraged by injustice, cry for a stranger's death, and fear human arrogance. A society that performs tragedy before causing tragedy is a society that knows how to save itself. The Athenians believed no one leaves the theatre the same as when they entered, because here there is not just character. There is you being tested. Do you dare face the truth? Do you have the courage to cry for an illusion that reflects your deepest secret fears? And when the drums sound, the stage materializes like a parallel world, not for you to escape reality, but for you to see reality so clearly that there is no turning back. This is not just a performance. This is a national pilgrimage. The Dionysia festival lasts 5 to 6 days. The entire city of Athens seems to hold its breath to live for art. Processions pass through every street, carrying statues of Dionysus, bunches of grapes, and the sound of flutes. People dance, people drink, people shout poetry at street corners. Each tribe, Phyle, in the city, selects a chorus team, dozens of men, to compete in tragedy, comedy, and dithyrambs. They train for months, fast, abstain from sex, and are seen as the sacred inspiration of the people. The atmosphere in Athens on those days is like a blend of the Super Bowl, Mardi Gras, and the Oscars. But instead of vain trophies, the reward here is tears truly shed onto hot stone. No one just comes to watch Dionysia. You are drawn in. You have no choice. You will laugh, cry, and touch a loss you didn't know you carried. Before stepping into the stage world, look around you, where you sit. This is no indoor theatre. It is a giant open-air stone semicircle built from the natural slope of the Acropolis Hill. The wind brushes through your hair. Birds fly through sunlight. And you are a link in a 12,000-person emotional machine. The largest theatre in Athens, Theatre of Dionysus, has no microphones. But if an actor whispers on stage, the person in the last row hears as clearly as if someone whispered in their ear. The ancient Greeks understood geometric structure like magic. The seats, theatron, place to see, circle around an empty space called the orchestra, where choruses dance and sing. Behind is the skene, a wooden backstage, where actors change masks, switch roles, and vanish into darkness. There is no distinction of high or low status, but seating reveals power. The front seats, proedria, are reserved for city leaders, generals, judges, tribal representatives. Their seats are often carved from stone, with armrests, like temporary thrones for learning to cry. Further back, commoners sit shoulder to shoulder. Children sleep in their mothers' laps. Beggars quietly wait. And all eyes focus on one thing, the sound of truth. Truth, spoken by those wearing masks. Welcome to Dionysia, where the boundary between ritual and art, between gods and stage, blurs under the Athens sun. There is no tragedy without wine, and no theatre without gods. Before theatre existed, the Greeks did not write scripts. They shouted poems when drunk, danced under the moon, painted their faces like unnamed spirits. It all began not in theatres, but in vineyards, caves, and the howling calls to Dionysus. Dionysus, the son of Zeus and a mortal woman, is the god of wine, pleasure, fertility, and madness. Every year, at the end of winter, a small Dionysia festival was held. Dithyrambs, collective songs, wide-eyed tongues slurred by wine, hands holding laurel branches, and hearts no longer knowing themselves. In that intoxicated state, people lost their names but found the truth. A stubborn soldier might burst into tears. A fisherman could become myth in a song. A widow might shout the name of her dead husband through the voice of an imaginary character. That was when the idea of theatre formed, as a collective ritual of transformation. But to control those emotions, they needed structure, a form, a set of rules. And so, at first, it was all just choral songs, dithyrambs, raised with flutes, dancing and wine. Dozens of men danced in a circle, shouting Dionysus's name, retelling myths in trembling voices. Then, one man stepped out of that circle. His name was Thespis, and he is considered humanity's first actor. He did not just sing. He dialogued with the chorus. He acted. He played gods, mortals, then madmen. And in that moment, the world was no longer a collective song. It became a personal conflict. From that came the concept of tragedy, tragoidia, meaning goat song. Perhaps because goats were sacrificed to Dionysus, or maybe because acting was like splitting oneself in two, half human, half beast, and thus masks were born. Why wear masks? Not only because the theatre was large, not only because you had to shout loudly so those 60 meters away could hear, but because you could not be yourself. The ancient Greeks believed when you wore a mask, you were no longer yourself. You became a channel for mythical spirits, a bridge between the human world and the world of tragedy. This was not acting, it was possession. And thanks to masks, everyone could be anyone. A slave could be a queen, a farmer could be Zeus, a grieving mother could be Medea. Wearing masks was a political act, a spiritual act, a way to break order to remake emotions. When you had no name, no face, you had no reason to lie. You were left only with words and truth. No one knows exactly when the Greek theatre mask first appeared, but it quickly became the symbol of all emotional transformation. Joy, sorrow, madness, clarity, God, human, all separated by a mask. One person could play 3 roles, just by changing mask and voice. And strangely, when faces are hidden, people speak more truth than ever. Masks were made of linen, light wood, painted white or black, with wide open mouths to amplify sound. The audience could not see expressions. They heard them, felt them, imagined them. You don't see tears, but you believe the person is crying. Before there were main characters, before Thespis, there was a collective that sang, spoke and cried for all. That was the chorus, a choral ensemble. They did not stand still. They moved in circles, waved hands, bowed heads, raised faces, like a many-headed, many-voiced being. Sometimes they were village elders, sometimes women of Thebes, sometimes ghosts of war. The chorus did more than narrate. They echoed conscience. They were the emotions the audience dared not voice. When the main character was silent, they spoke. When the main character rebelled, they feared. And when everything collapsed, they screamed as if all of Athens was falling into the pit. The chorus helped Greeks not just watch theatre, but live it, breathe it, and feel that pain was the concern of the whole community. Therefore, Dionysus was not only the god of wine, he was the god of controlled loss of control. He was the first to teach humans the most important lesson of the stage. To live truly, first you must accept that you are acting. And so, from a drunken crowd, singing wildly under grapevines, Greece created one of the deepest art forms humanity has ever known. Theatre, where lies are used to reveal truth. No one comes to Dionysia just for entertainment. They come to touch their own wounds. Tragedy is not to cry for a character, but to cry for yourself, without being mocked. When you enter the theatre, you don't laugh or joke. You sit in silence, among thousands also silent like you. Everyone knows the thing about to happen on stage is not easy to swallow. Then the character steps out. He might be Oedipus, the wise king who saved Thebes from disaster. He stands tall, confident, daring to look the gods in the eye, until he realizes the woman he loves is his own mother. You hear screams, but what sends shivers is not the sound. It's the silence that follows, an invisible crack in logic, in morality, in belief about cosmic order. Greek tragedy is never gentle. No good people survive, no bad people are punished, only humans, writhing between fate and choice. The Greeks called it catharsis, cleansing. Not every crying is tragedy. There must be structure, rhythm, limits. Classical tragedy has only 3 male actors. Each wears many masks, switching roles constantly, from father to son, from god to murderer. The whole world, contained in 3 bodies, a chorus, and a round stone stage. Playwrights did not just write. They directed, trained actors, composed music for the chorus, sometimes begged nobles for funding. The structure of a play always has 3 main parts. Prologue, the opening with narration or lament. Episode, the main dialogues. Exodus, the exit, the end, the collapse of hope. The chorus is not just background. They are the hinge between parts, the omniscient outsiders, the collective conscience. And strangely, though this rule repeats, no one grows bored, because what changes each time is you, a kind of healing through hurting. You are allowed to witness pain, feel it deep in your gut, then leave the theatre without carrying it in your heart. Tragedy is a class without a teacher, where every question has no answer, and that is the lesson. You are not just watching a play. You are looking in a mirror. You see yourself in Antigone, when you fight for what is right, but are called a rebel. You see yourself in Electra, when anger overwhelms forgiveness. You see yourself in Oedipus, when you confidently step forward, unaware you are walking into fate. Tragedy forces you to role play, not because you want to, but because it chooses you. That is the unconscious power of symbols. Every prophecy, every foolish decision of a character makes you shiver, because you have done the same in real life. Can you rehearse emotions through tragedy to be stronger outside? The Greeks did not say that aloud, but they came to watch. They cried. They left the theatre, and the next day they lived on. And that is the lesson. How do you keep loyalty when laws are unjust? When gods are silent, do humans have the right to rebel? If destiny is written, what meaning does effort have? Greek theatre was not always loved by the authorities, because sometimes it dared to say things no one dared say. Euripides wrote Medea, where a foreign woman kills her children, and still has reason. Sophocles' Antigone, a young girl defying the king to bury her brother, was banned for centuries as too dangerous for the established order. Tragedy is where small characters dare look gods, laws, and hypocrisy straight in the eye. And often, the audience stands and applauds, while power remains silent. From Aeschylus, who wrote Oresteia as a collective confession, to Sophocles, who created the first psychological tragedy in Oedipus Rex, and Euripides, who dared let a mother kill her children in Medea. They never sought approval. They sought to force you to face the darkest part of yourself. You may leave the stage still hurting, but at least you know you are not alone in that pain, because all of Athens just cried with you. Tragedy saves no one, but it gives you reason to keep living, even though nothing guarantees you'll be okay. After crying all your tears with tragedy, the Greeks chose to laugh, not because they were optimistic, but because some things can only be spoken with laughter. If tragedy is a scalpel to the soul, then comedy is the cleaver striking straight to the head of power. On the Dionysia stage, comedy days are lively. No silence, no solemnity. The audience yells, mocks, whistles, demands actors sing the bawdy song again. But don't think it's just play. Greek comedy, especially old comedy, has a strict structure, precise enough to be taught in anatomy class. It begins with a prologue, where the main character proposes a crazy plan, like banning men from fighting by banning sex. Next is parados. The chorus enters, dancing, singing, shouting, often wielding inappropriate props. Argon is the center. Two characters fiercely debate the main issue, like a boxing match of words. Then parabasis. The chorus stops the play, turns to speak directly to the audience, not the characters, but the author, using the chorus's voice to complain, lament poverty, and ask for patronage. Finally, episodes and exodus, chaotic scenes ending with a dance, a drinking party, or a wedding of birds and fish. nothing is too much, only too bland. If tragedy is to cleanse, comedy is to liberate, because comedy is the only place you can name politicians and insult them to their face. Aristophanes, the greatest Athenian comedian, wrote The Clouds, where Socrates is turned into a crazy old man hanging in a basket studying the skies. In The Frogs, he staged dead writers arguing who was the worst author. And in Lysistrata, one of his most famous plays, he made women strike sexually to force men to stop war. That laughter is not harmless. It shakes city councils. It makes those sitting in front, who are mocked on stage, pretend to laugh so they're not caught out. Laughter is not always forgiven. Aristophanes was sued for defaming Athenian citizens after portraying Socrates as a basket case. Some senators wanted to ban comedies with characters too close to real people because they saw themselves in them. But Athenians never voted to ban comedy because they understood one thing. If people aren't allowed to laugh, they will find other ways to vent. The stage, in a democracy, is the only place power must listen without reply, where laughter can do what rallies cannot. Greek comedy does not avoid obscenity. They painted giant penises, danced around the stage, spoke crudely in tragic tones, not to shock. Those phalluses, big as pillars and spring-loaded, are not cheap jokes. They symbolize life, harvest, fertility, closely tied to Dionysus, the god of chaos and rebirth. During festivals, when social order is temporarily overturned, forbidden things appear openly, as a cleansing ritual. Laughing at the phallus is laughing at society's helplessness before desire, war, and death. And sometimes, in those ridiculous bursts of laughter, people feel more powerful than fate. To say, no power that can't take a joke, deserves respect. But within that laughter, there is also despair. You laugh, because if you don't, you'll revolt. You mock, because the truth is too painful to say seriously. When the Peloponnesian War drained Athens, people still came to see comedy, as a way to hold on to the last shred of normalcy. The truth is, they didn't just come to watch, they came to participate. Ancient Athenian audiences were loud and powerful beings. They shouted, stamped their feet, clapped, threw figskins, and even demanded to stop the play if it was boring. The stage was where the audience could decide the fate of the work. A play could be applauded to extend, or buried right after the first act. The chorus knew it. Actors knew it. And playwrights lived and died by it. So Greek comedy was not just art. It was a public battle of wits between author and audience. Whoever wins gets to laugh. Whoever loses is booed off. Simple, sweaty, and democratic to the core. The serious don't make revolutions. The humorous dare to overturn the table. Comedy does not heal like tragedy. It doesn't make you cry. It makes you face reality and laugh in its face. Because that's all you can do. When reason fails, morality is overturned, and the world truly becomes too ridiculous to bear. When you look at the ancient Greek stage, you won't see anyone's real face. Only oversized masks made of papier-mâché, wood, or leather, with wide open mouths to amplify the voice, and eyes like labeled emotions. And strangely, the very artifice helps the stage touch human truth. You don't need to see every muscle twitch, because the entire body, voice, gesture scream what society dares not say. The strongest roles in ancient Greek drama are not kings or generals, but those despised in real life, slaves, women, madmen, outcasts. While banned from speaking in the agora, they speak wisdom, sharpness, and sometimes prophecy on stage. A slave might curse his master in verse. A widow might demand justice with sharper logic than philosophers. A madman might see clearly what the whole city pretends not to notice. When society only hears truth from those mocked, then that person becomes the last keeper of justice. All roles, even female ones, were played by men. Women were banned from the stage. But that did not make female characters weaker. On the contrary, women on the ancient Greek stage were strong, sharp, clever, overthrowing men by strategy, desire, and silence. In Lysistrata, women declare a sex strike to force men to stop war. In Thesmophorisuse, women plot to deal with Euripides for insulting them in tragedy. Male actors wear skirts, fake breasts, women's masks, but the audience does not laugh at female acting. They laugh because truth is spoken through disguise. Masks do not only hide faces, they reveal essence. Some only live truly by hiding their faces. And on the Athens stage, masks create a space for truth to be exposed. There, you can be a god, a queen, a thief, a widow, a walking phallus, as long as you dare shout what the whole city pretends not to see. When wearing a mask, you are no longer yourself. You are a symbol, and because of that, you are allowed to speak forbidden things. Athenians were not fools. They knew behind the mask stood their neighbor, or worse, a citizen speaking against the government, but they accepted it, because the stage was the only safe space for what could not be said in the agora, political square. A wrong word at the council could get you exiled. A true word on stage earned you applause. Art is not a place to hide truth. It is a place where truth wears a mask to survive. In a world bound by honor, gender, status, and power, the stage is the only place you can mock all of it and still be invited for a drink after the show. The more masks people wear, the easier it is for them to speak the truth. Written on the wall of an ancient theatre in Epidaurus, or maybe someone made it up. In Athens, where democracy was born, you don't need to be a general or philosopher to hear your voice echo. You only need a ticket to sit in the Dionysia Theatre, and then you sit beside slaves, merchants, veteran soldiers, youths, philosophers, widows, all facing the same stage, where a king cries for dead wife and children, or a god is deceived by a mortal. Greek theatre is not entertainment for the elite. It is an emotional speech, sent to the entire people. Every year, during the great Dionysia festival, tens of thousands gather to watch competing plays, like a World Cup. But instead of balls, there are tears and laughter. Tickets are subsidized by the state even for the poor, because watching plays is considered a civic duty. A good Athenian citizen is one who can listen to a king's fall and ask if they themselves might be wrong. Don't forget, on the Greek stage, there is not only character, but a strange entity, the chorus. They don't tell the story, they don't decide, but they breathe with the audience. The chorus is the voice of the demos, of the people, the soundtrack of anxiety, the emotional undercurrent running alongside the story. When Oedipus panics, the chorus screams with him. When Medea silently sharpens her knife, the chorus moans, then falls silent. The chorus is not an outsider. They are you, the viewer, pushed onto the stage to speak what you have not yet dared think. And because of that, Greek theatre becomes a place where the community looks in the mirror through the collective voice. In Athens, before a boy is considered a mature citizen, he doesn't just learn sword fighting, poetry, or debate. He learns to cry, be angry, fear, and forgive through plays. The theatre is not just entertainment, it is an outdoor classroom. There you see a lying king and learn about truth. You see a mother kill her child and learn about the tragedy of ideals. No one lectures on right and wrong, but every Athenian citizen leaves with a new decision for their conscience. When Oedipus gouges out his eyes on stage, the audience feels fear, and then they reflect. When Electra cries for her father, the audience feels anger, and then they question society. The play does not command, it does not call for votes, but it forces you to face the question, if it were me, would I dare do differently? Sitting in the crowd, you don't have to speak, but you feel the helplessness of a father, the pain of a woman, the panic of a ruler. That is emotional democracy. No ballots, but empathy. No parties, but regret. No shouting, but tears falling at once. Athens taught democracy not through laws, but through the stage. A modern historian, and perhaps someone who cried watching Medea. On Athens soil, no one is considered mature if they haven't felt what others feel, not through preaching, but through borrowed pain via a role. Greek theatre is the first time in history when the whole society practiced emotions, not spontaneous feelings, but organized, controlled, scripted emotions. Anger has rhythm, fear has layers, tears have logic. Before Athens' audience stepped into the theatre, they brought not only tickets, but mental preparation. Play days coincide with the great Dionysia festival, when the city parades the god, fasts, prays, and pauses trials. The atmosphere is like before a soul's trial. You don't just watch a play, you participate in a ritual. You put your heart in the storyteller's hands and accept you might cry for an unreal character. An ancient actor must scream madly when his character rages, but his hands still count the beat so the chorus enters on time. He must tremble from losing a child, but pronounce every vowel perfectly. Athenians didn't act for immersion. They acted believing emotions are a craft that can be learned, taught, shared. Each Athenian tragedy is not just a story, but an emotional report of the entire city. After the Peloponnesian War, Athenians didn't need therapists. They had Sophocles. Ajax, a great warrior, betrayed by comrades, gradually driven mad, then suicided. No one in the audience was Ajax, but they all were part of the silence that killed a hero. These plays helped the community release pent-up emotions, name collective pain, and sometimes redeem without apology. When you sit among 15,000 people, no one tells you to cry. But when Orestes screams over his mother's crime and the stage falls silent, you cannot help but shiver. That is no longer the fear of an individual. It is the collective acceptance that something is wrong. Athens understood. Emotions are the glue binding citizens into a society, and the stage mixes that glue every year. When a civilization chooses to learn ethics through tears, Romans learn ethics through law. Egyptians learn ethics through myth. But Greeks, they chose the stage. They let their children watch a mother kill her child and wonder why. They let the whole people see a king fall and not rise to help, because they believed some lessons only flow through the heart, not through the ear. Athens did not just invent democracy, it also invented how to teach democracy through the hearts of others. Some sleepy storyteller Athenians do not applaud after the performance, not because they did not like it, but because they have not yet returned to being themselves. They stand up from the stone seats, the late afternoon sunlight slanting through the mask of Dionysus, and they still think about the death of a hero who never really existed. They don't ask, "What is the actor's name?" They ask, "Was I once part of that crime?" When theatre teaches people how to live a play lasts 3 hours, but its echo can follow a man his whole life. Some leave and decide to forgive their old father. Some remain silent and understand that they once hurt someone who did not deserve it. And there are children who go home to tell their mother, "I don't know why she killed her child, but I see she is in pain." Theatre does not create good people, but it creates people who know pain. Athenians did not believe that art saves anyone, but they believed that art can teach people not to trample on others' pain. A city-state can only stand strong when every citizen knows to pause before the moan of the weak. And in Athens, the only place that teaches that is the stage. The ancient Greeks leave the theatre as if stepping out of a funeral, but a funeral for the ugliness within themselves. Historian Sleepless. Ancient Greek theatre had no curtains, no happy endings, and no real endings. Only sunlight, shining on unfinished tragedies within the audience's hearts. Theatre is not lies, it is a test. If you think the stage is a place of pretense, you're right. But Athens did not pretend to escape reality. They pretended to see reality more clearly. By putting on masks, they allowed themselves to strip bare real emotions. By killing a king on stage, they taught each other how to keep justice in real life. And by letting a flawed character speak their full mind, they created a society that listens to opponents before judging. The stage is the laboratory of the soul. There, people try the role of villain, to learn how to stop evil in real life. There, people cry for a stranger mother, to learn how to hold their own child tighter at night. There, people allow themselves to feel what they normally suppress. Because being a citizen, without knowing the community's emotions, is just a body that knows how to vote. Not everyone who watches theatre changes, but everyone who has changed has watched a play. And perhaps that is why wealthy Athenians sponsored plays. Not to elevate art, but to keep this society capable of feeling. Ancient Athens stage did not just teach people how to live, it also taught how not to become monsters in a democracy.